If the president decides to launch a nuke, let's say on Syria, he's going to have a briefcase, a nuclear football. Inside that, there is a transmitter and there's a plastic card, like if you think of like a oversized playing card that's made of plastic. He cracks the card across a seam and pulls out a 6, 10, 12-digit alphanumeric code. And then the football case is a transmitter, so he can type this alphanumeric code into the transmitter. That is a launch code. So anytime you hear about launch codes, that's the launch code. It's in the briefcase. That transmitter then sends that code to all the nuclear bases, all the silos, everything at once. But only the nuclear silos that are targeting the target that was part of that launch code, only those missiles are activated. So that code that he types in is the emergency action message that comes across our system. It's re-encrypted in a different alphanumeric. We demodulate that alphanumeric, put it into another system that runs that alphanumeric against an classified encrypted cipher. That cipher then knows whether or not the launch code is valid, confirms which missiles are valid to launch against that launch code, and then launches the missiles. So you would never know, because remember, we're in a capsule that's geographically separate from the missiles. We don't even know if we launched. We have zero idea. We just plug it in, hit enter, plug it in, hit enter. Sometimes those codes come with a command to twist to turn your key. So sometimes you turn your key along with the alphanumeric. You never really know what you're doing.
So if one was launched, nobody would actually know if they were the ones that launched it?
Correct.
Or I mean, whoever's servicing the missile site's going to know because the fucking missile actually left, right?
Right. So the people that would know, as funny as it is, are actually the military police, whose job it is to secure the missile field because they're always driving around. They would notice when in the middle of the night, fucking 200-ton concrete block blows off and a rocket goes off. Yeah.
So with this nuclear football and the key that you crack, which sounds like almost like a chem light.
Yeah.
Two questions with that. One, like, are there a bunch of different cards? Like, here's the Syria card, here's the New Zealand card. Not that there probably even is one. Here's the Russia card. Like, is that how it's organized?
From what I understand, there's a country code, just like when you call your cell phone. There's a country code that's always current and programmed in. So essentially, when they crack the nuclear code, they put a country code and then a valid nuclear code, and that's what translates into the system. And I'm sure there's other, sublines that I was never read in on.
Yeah.
But that's the basic unclassified version of how it all works.
Okay.
And to your point about, we never know. One of the things that was really humbling about that job was discovering that we're just a redundancy.
Right.
Because the nuclear missile program has to always be prepared for what to do if there is a conscientious objector, if you're sick, if you're incapacitated. Maybe this is a retaliatory launch, and the first launch already happened, and Russia killed the nuclear capsule crew. We're not even needed, right? Because the reason that code gets sent worldwide to all nuclear bases is because if you and I are in one capsule and we have our 10 missiles, and our 10 missiles have 3 warheads each, if we're incapacitated because we're fighting or we're sick or we got blown up by the Russians, our missiles are still live. So now somebody else's crew 200 miles away, when they execute on that valid launch code, our missiles will launch because somebody else's crew validated the launch code. Yeah. And then if every ground crew everywhere was neutralized simultaneously because they poisoned the water, let's say, right? If everybody was incapacitated, they'd fly a fucking plane over our heads with 2 people in it who would send a validated code remotely to all the nuclear weapons, and the right ones would launch. Like, you're a redundancy of a redundancy of a redundancy. Classic military protocols, humbling, but also kind of genius.
Yeah. Well, genius in terms of making sure it happens under any circumstance.
Yeah.
The football, who's actually carrying it?
So that's a big question I've always wondered too. The president doesn't actually carry it. Somebody on the president's staff actually carries it, but I don't know I don't know what the name or title of that person is. Yeah. And like, we've all seen the president at the Rose Garden, in the Oval Office. Like, we've all seen the president without seeing a person carrying a football.
Yeah, you never see anybody carrying a fucking briefcase or whatever.
So it makes me wonder who that person is. It would also make sense that there's probably a protocol in place. So that person is always behind a camera. That person is always within 50 feet or something like that, but maybe not always on top of the president.
Would there be an Air Force guy or an Air Force officer that's servicing the football?
Yeah. So I would anticipate either it's a Department of Energy official, sworn Department of Energy officer, or a sworn U.S. Air Force officer, or a sworn U.S. Navy officer. Yeah. And I say that, plainclothes officers. I say that because the only three arms of the real nuclear triad are ground-based missiles controlled by the Air Force.
Submarines.
Yep. Sea-based missiles controlled by the Navy. And the Department of Energy is actually the federal oversight for all nuclear weapons and all nuclear energy generation. So people don't realize that either. DOE is actually the primary. So those three would be the only people I would imagine they'd put in charge of that football.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've known a few guys that have gone and worked for DOE doing nuke transport shit and site security and all kinds of stuff. It's a fascinating line of work for sure. What is the training like for a nuke officer? Like when you go from being a fencing instructor at the academy to being a redundancy in the nuke chain.
You know, I had, so for people who don't know, pilot training is a shit show. Pilot training sucks. I think when you go to Naval Flight Aviator School in Pensacola, I think that's the only fun, quote unquote, fun version. And I'll let a naval aviator tell me if that's true or not. But for Air Force, it sucks everywhere. It's 14-hour days of rote memorization and drilling and everything else, and it sucks. But nuke school was fun, dude. Nuke school was a shit ton of fun because there's like no stress, because everybody basically labels a nuclear missile officer as like the shit cans of the Air Force anyways. So there's zero pressure for you to be like high achieving or be excellent, right?
A low bar.
Yeah, but then to pass the ASVAB, to get to nuke school, you got to be smart.
Yeah.
So you got a bunch of like smart people with no pressure to overachieve.
Yeah. Smart rejects.
Yeah, and you're all sitting there knowing that no matter how hard you try or how much you slack, you're all going to end up underground 30 days out of every 180 days, right? Yeah. So you already know it's coming. So you're just kind of on this path, and I mean that was the most true Air Force experience I had. Like the officers club every Friday, you know, playing pool and shooting darts and having barbecues at friends' houses, and you're only working 8 hours a day, and you know that was it. People getting engaged, people dating, and you know people getting drunk on the weekends and on 3-day weekends. Like that was a fun time.
So what is a typical 8-hour shift or the 30 days underground out of 180? What does that consist of?
So I'll go back one step, because when it comes to nuke school, most of what you're doing at nuke school is understanding the operating systems that drive the capsule.
Are you learning about the capabilities in terms of how many megatons or whatever the fucking bombs are? And they're like laughably more powerful than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right?
But also more controlled. Yeah. So yes, you're learning about the warheads and the yields. You're learning about the realities of what does the world look like before you launch? What does the world look like after you launch? And you're supposed to be still be a viable officer after you launch. So, you know, you turn those keys, you launch those weapons. You don't just stay underground. You got to come out through the escape hatch and then start leading soldiers again, right? So there's all this stuff that goes into it, plus how the targeting system works, how the rocket system works, how the maintenance system works. How do you communicate with the military police? How do you communicate with the chef? How do you communicate with command and control? And how do you escalate? And all the gigantic book of checklists. You got to run through all those checklists and go through simulators. They have missile silo simulators that you actually go through all the actions for all the different outcomes. So it's fun, but it's like 6 or 8 months of that. All of that happens so that when you get on the job and you're actually sitting in the silo, you're doing very little. Yeah. Like every 45 to 90 minutes, a new EAM comes in. You go through the whole process of doing your tippity tap, bippity boppity boop, and then you wait for 30 to 90 minutes or 90 to 45 to 90 minutes for the next one and the next one. And for me, in 2008, they moved us to 3-day shifts. So you would be underground with the same person for 3 days. And that was coming off of a 24-hour shift before that. So
is it ever co-ed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there some shit going on?
Always.
Hey, we can make this 3 days go by real fucking fast.